Being an early boot doesn't mean you can't have a bloated screen presence, so from iconic returnees to largely forgotten one-time flameouts, we'll be looking at the top 5 early boots that left their impression on Survivor. At number 5 we're starting off with the infamous Zian Knight, who was booted in the premiere of Survivor Philippines first, but still obtained an insane 9 confessionals. In fact, even though Zian is the first person we're covering on this list, he is actually tied with the 4th place individual on this list. The editors coming into season 25 clearly wanted to invest a lot of time into the Mat Singh tribe that through their dysfunction and 4-episode losing streak would eventually garner one of the most likeable contestants in Malcolm, as well as the eventual winner in Denise. So in setting up the underdog dynamics in episode 1, they were obviously going to show off the biggest underdog of underdogs in Zian. Not to mention, Zian had a lot of unique charm. His backstory was interesting, and it was clear that, similar to the likes of Saray, he was out of his element on the island. Additionally, Zian had a pretty scatterbrained strategy, which the editors always love. He made an alliance with everyone on his tribe right off the bat, causing some humorous moments.
Zane walked up and says, "Listen, I already made an alliance with everybody on this beach. Well, now I feel special. Thanks for coming to me last."
However, it's when his tribe lost the immunity challenge, Zian revealed in his confessionals what is perhaps known as the most insane plan of any first boot. He wanted his entire tribe to vote him out. Now, to give Zian some credit, he tried to use this defeatist attitude to emotionally manipulate everyone into keeping him out of pity, but of course when you tell people you're cool with being the first boot, they'll likely hold you to that. When you look at it from a distance, yes, it's rather bizarre that on a 3-tribe season with a 90-minute premiere, they would dedicate so much time to the first boot of the season, but when you delve deeper, you realise Zian was a fully worthy pick to receive such a massive chunk of screen time. That's great and all, but have you heard of something better? It's called Outplays. Outplays is the sponsor of this video, with over a dozen puzzles that are Survivor inspired, so you can play Survivor from the comfort of your own home. You don't have to fly over to Fiji, you don't have to starve on an island, you can actually play the Survivor puzzles for yourself, and there's over a dozen on the store, including the fire puzzle, Will It Go Round, and many, many more. So make sure to check out Outplay, the link is in the description, and also use Bandit Survivor 10 to be able to help me out. Similar to Zian, at number 4 we have Francesca Hoagie. She was the first boot of her season and also had 9 confessionals in her 1-episode stint. Whilst she had a sizable confessional count in Redemption Island, it's actually her returning game in Karamoan that scored her a spot in this video. Francesca will debatably go down as the most questionable returnee in American Survivor history, particularly for the fact she was selected as a favourite. Again, despite lasting only 1 round in a season, only remembered as a Boston Rob steamroll. Off the bat, it becomes glaringly obvious what the producers are doing when we get to the beaches. Philip and Francesca had entertaining arguments in season 22, and 4 seasons later, it seemed like they tried to recreate the magic. This really forms the bulk of Francesca's ludicrous 9 confessional total. She addresses the previous season's rivalry with Philip, how she feels about playing another season with him, and ultimately how she intends to avoid repeating the legacy of being first boot. In fact, her discussion about trying to avoid repeating her Redemption Island trajectory only became more ironic through her now iconic line.
"If I am voted off first a second time, I will eat this rock."
As expected, the favourites tribe lost the first immunity challenge. However, fortunately, the tribe initially banded around eliminating Andrea, another former Redemption Island contestant. Although that only lasted for a short amount of time, as eventually the first boot target seemed to fall back on Francesca, and considering Express, it actually seemed Francesca's previous record of being first boot made it easy for the 6-person majority to send her packing. I do love this tribal council though, as it essentially it's a rerun of Redemption Island, with Philip actually proving he can save Francesca this time, with Francesca being the Sandra Diaz-Twine of First Boots after the Caramoan premiere. It made all the sense in the world that she would be given a large confessional count before her elimination. That being said, believe it or not, she has been surpassed. This is because the next individual on this list comes a mere 2 seasons later in Survivor Cagayan. Season 28 featured a double 2-hour boot premiere to kick things off, resulting in the second boot in Garrett receiving an insane 11 confessionals within this one episode. I have to admit, Garrett was the most surprising individual on this list. Sure, I knew he had a lot of confessionals in the Cagayan premiere, but for him to end up with the 3rd highest confessional per episode average ever is quite an insane stat, although when you really delve deeper it does make sense. Firstly, Garrett was selected by the elected Brain tribe leader David as the weakest individual on his tribe. However, in classic Survivor fashion, there was a twist, allowing the weakest selected from each tribe to go to their own camp early and take part in a dilemma. As expected, this allowed Garrett a solid amount of screen time, as he was free to explore the Brain tribe camp himself and react to his position of supposedly being the weakest on his tribe. This was only topped by Garrett picking the idol clue over helping his tribe, then searching relentlessly for said idol, which he eventually found. When the Brains tribe lost the first challenge, David decided to originally target Garrett due to alienating him. This also formed a fundamental amount of Garrett's confessional count, as he was largely the main one in the edit to quote-unquote get back at David and plan his demise. Ultimately it worked, with a 4-2 majority on Garrett's side and a pretty satisfying arc with the leader David Sampson overplaying his hand, while the underdogs like Garrett took him out. Unfortunately for Garrett, the second half of the premiere was less forgiving towards him, as he was made out to be a complete doofus, wanting open discussions after losing the second immunity challenge, and also saying on how they should succeed. The second half of the premiere is more so used to show Garrett's sharp downfall through mismanaging Cass, openly alienating Tasha, and somehow not playing his idol despite knowing he would receive votes. Considering how unique of an end Garrett had to his run, it was obvious Survivor Production was going to invest a lot of time into him and his confessionals. However, number 2 on this list is another returnee, and it's the only non-winning game from Tony Vlachos. Game Changer, similar to Cagayan, was a 2-hour double boot premiere, and in spite of the infamous Sierra Easton being first boot, this episode was really devoted to the second boot, with episode 1 being pretty much the Tony show. Survivor Game Changers was a mismatch of winners, several contestants that made it far across multiple seasons, and unfortunately half that, they are game changers. So hey, I'm going to call a spade a spade. Tony was fortunately one of these actual game changers, as he won his initial season in Survivor Cagayan, and as a result he got the first confessional of the season, detailing how big of a threat he is because of the game he played 3 years ago. Because Tony had probably one of the biggest targets in Survivor history, it appeared he was more so coming into this season to have fun while creating good TV. So if this was his strategy, it was successful, as in this one episode he got 12 confessionals. As soon as the Manu tribe hit their beach, Tony ran off into the jungle, maniacally declaring he was going to look for the idol. This allowed us some fun downtime in Tony's confessional booth, as he displayed his disappointment that no one followed him, only to begin digging his spy bunker. In spite of initially coming off as sketchy, and that statement is probably an understatement, Tony was able to push for Sierra to be the first boot of the tribe due to her scheming. The second half of the premiere was a stark contrast to Tony's success. He again got more content detailing the need for big threats together, and attempted to create a group of 5. One of them was with the 2-time winner Sandra Diaz-Twine, who only grew to distrust Tony and then build her own faction of 5. To make matters worse, Mana went 0-2 after the following immunity challenge, because Malcolm is seemingly a ring toss prodigy, and Tony's tribe had to vote out another person. In spite of Tony campaigning for people to keep the tribe strong so they could actually win a challenge, Sandra got the last laugh by convincing everyone Tony was the boot, making him the first prior winner since Tina in All Stars to have their torch snuffed by the end of episode 1. But as previously discussed, Tony wasn't number 1 on this list. And the individual who is may shock you. This is because they aren't a returnee like Francesca or Tony, and they did come from a more modern Survivor season where contestants are usually more evenly distributed in the edit. However, the person to have beaten Tony in this list, the eventual 2-time winner of Survivor, the man himself, is somehow Jacob freaking Derwin, with 15 confessionals per episode as a total. If you've watched my video last year on who is the biggest screen hog in Survivor, you'll know I actually disqualified all the pre-merge boots for the reason that their confessional totals are completely skewed. Jacob has been the most exposed Survivor contestant ever in Survivor US across the average number of episodes they survived, which is probably something you didn't expect when clicking on this video. Jacob in Ghost Island is the prototype for the overly ambitious Survivor superfan that blew up their spot in the early game, similar to likes of Zach Wartenberger or David Jelinski that would follow him. The 2-hour Ghost Island premiere was essentially an episode dedicated to Jacob and how he did quite literally everything wrong. This is made even more bizarre by the fact Jacob in one episode obtained more confessionals than mid to late game merge makers like Sebastian or Chelsea overall. In fact, in the first hour, Jacob gets 9 confessionals, which is more than the combined total of the final 4 of the season in Dominic, Wendell, Laurel and Angela, as well as the first boot in Gonzalez and the confessional total they get in this time frame. Jacob started the game on the bottom and was established as the most obvious choice of first boots to ever exist. He didn't click with his tribe, he was too overly strategic and would sabotage his tribe just to search for the hidden immunity idol in the weirdest of places. But as already hinted at, Jacob actually survived into episode 2, mainly because he was such an obvious first boot that the opposing Navidi tribe sent him to Ghost Island when they won the challenge. As already covered in Garrett's section, if you're picked to take part in a dilemma by yourself, a good chunk of that screen time should be coming your way. This was no exception to Jacob, who got to detail what Ghost Island was like due to him being the first person to step foot on it, and his confessional count was only bolstered by obtaining the legacy advantage that he could give to someone on the other tribe. Predictably, Jacob mismanaged the situation by revealing to his tribe he supposedly got a hidden immunity idol, which only served to solidify the need to get him out. Ultimately, the content before Jacob's boot is predictable. We know the majority will split the votes, we know Jacob doesn't have an idol, so the only intrigue is who they will split it on. Jacob even gets more content, putting the nail in his coffin by telling Stephanie his idol isn't even real, as he throws Morgan under the bus due to her being the one he gave his legacy advantage to. As heartbreaking as it seems, it really appears production edited Jacob to be an example of how not to play Survivor in actuality, with his eventual elimination being easily predicted since the first 20 minutes. A massive thanks to Carly Levitz and co for letting me use their incredible Survivor template, and if you want to see stats for all Survivor players, make sure to check out the link to their website below. Nevertheless, enjoy your day. Peace!